Hi, everyone, and welcome to our workshop on how to do research and get published. Thank you for joining the presentation. Today, we are focusing on what it takes to get published in an academic journal, specifically on how to convert your thesis or dissertation into an academic manuscript. To get us started, I'd like to introduce you to the team. Maya Dixon helps manage social science titles as an assistant editor for Sage. She earned her BA in political science with a minor in creative writing at San Diego State University. While in university, she was a thesis associate for Montezuma Publishing and an editorial assistant for Poetry International. Next, we're joined by Amy Goundry, PhD, a managing editor at Sage, who oversees 3 journals in the Gold Open Access portfolio. She manages Clinical Medicine Insights Oncology, a cancer research and treatment journal, Inquiry, a public health and healthcare journal, and Science Progress, a multidisciplinary journal where she oversees the life science-related sections. Amy holds a PhD in infection and immunology from the University of Glasgow, Scotland. Next, Dr. Derek Fisher is the editor-in-chief of Clinical EEG and Neuroscience. His research program utilizes EEG and neuroimaging, like MRI, MRS, to explore areas cognitive and clinical neuroscience, focusing on the brain-based mechanisms underlying psychiatric conditions. We're also joined by Dr. Tiffany A. Flowers, a multidisciplinary research with a background in early childhood education, curriculum and instruction, psychology, social, philosophical, and historical foundations of education, teaching and learning, and language, literacy, and culture. Her research also focuses on cultural contexts, community engagement, and issues related to families. And last, my name is Sean Scarsbrick, a senior marketing manager on the author marketing team at Sage, and my primary role is to provide support to authors and reviewers as they move through the publishing process. Before we move on, I'd like to highlight some of the work by our panelists. As we mentioned, Derek is the editor-in-chief of Clinical EEG and Neuroscience. If you're in the subject area, consider this journal for your manuscript or consider registering as a reviewer. And Tiffany is also working on Sage Campus courses on choosing a journal, navigating peer review, and article promotion. You can sign up for a trial for Sage Campus or check with your institution or library to see if you already have access. Throughout today's call, please send us your questions via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to answer all of your questions live, but if we don't get to them all, we will follow up in a blog post after the call. And I would like to get us situated with an illustration of the typical author journey, moving from the early stages of securing funding and conducting research all the way through peer review and publication. We will cover how to convert your thesis or dissertation into a manuscript, mainly focusing on the writing process today. And with that, I'm happy to pass it off to Tiffany.
Thank you. So all of you are here because you're thinking about how to get published in a way that will advance your career. Maybe you're considering how to share the results or findings from your doctoral research, but today we encourage you to take a broader view. Your entire dissertation or thesis, along with all the work you've produced along the way, holds valuable material for publication. Let's be honest, you've put a tremendous amount of time and effort into reaching this stage. You've developed extensive research, taken notes, written memos, and engaged with countless papers. You may have drafted reports, written professional documents outside of academia, given presentations, or even created media related to your research. All of this represents potential content you can repurpose. So take a step back and review everything you've created. Assess what you already have. Think about how you can use these ideas and writings to develop different types of publications, extending the impact of your work in new and meaningful ways. Your dissertation contains a wealth of material. All of these materials can serve as building blocks for new publications. In some fields, book chapters and books are valued. In other disciplines, they may value journal articles. But regardless, if no one is reading your work, what's the point? It's important to think about all aspects of the publishing process and how you can promote your work and what will make the most impact. We have another great webinar on this. If you're considering a publication or impact, it's the quality of the idea that counts. You may be thinking primarily about journal articles. which are certainly important for many kinds of academic positions. But again, we encourage you to take a larger view. In this digitally connected world, there are lots of ways that we can disseminate our research, not only to other scholars, but to policymakers, members of the public, practitioners, all of whom can use it. So think in terms of a publication strategy and look for ways that you can use other forms of dissemination to build your credibility, build your reputation, and your name recognition as an expert in your field. You want to use a variety of means to reach your desired goals. There are many formats that contribute to your academic reputation. These include research reports, editorials, commentaries, essays, blog posts, book chapters, newsletters, social media content, and even podcasts or videos. Think about how you can tailor your research to different audiences and mediums. For instance, a blog post might help you engage with a broader audience, while a research article helps establish your expertise in an academic field. Think strategically about which formats align with your career goals. I'll now turn things over to Maya. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. So now that we've considered different publication formats, let's focus on how to break down your dissertation into publishable components. Today, we are going to suggest 5 different options. This is not to say that you're going to use all of these, but as you look at your body of work, there are different ways to think about how you can use it. Your thesis is a rich source of content that can be adapted into different formats. One option is to extract key findings and turn them into journal articles. This might involve splitting your work into multiple papers, each focused on a different aspect of your research. Your literature review might be transformed into a research paper or book chapter. Another approach is adapting a chapter into a book or a policy brief, which can target decision makers in your field. You might also consider writing blog posts or social media content to share insights from your research in an accessible way. For instance, data-heavy sections could be turned into research reports, while broader insights may work well as blog posts or social media articles. Think about conference presentations, for instance, being a part of a panel in a conference or presenting. Talking about your research and answering people's questions will help you to adapt your work to the scholarly audience of your field or even the professional audience of your field. By participating in a conference, you get a better sense of what other people find is important about your work. The key takeaway here is that your dissertation is a resource, and you can maximize its value by tailoring it to different audiences. Be strategic. Identify the best format for your work and tailor your content accordingly. Extract. Here you might find that there are some parts of your academic writing that can stand alone. For instance, literature reviews are published as scholarly articles or book chapters. Maybe you have a succinct, fantastic problem statement that really describes the issue at hand, and that could be an article or it could be a blog post. We ask you today, what could you pull out from your writing that could be just polished off a little bit and become a piece of published work? Another example, if your dissertation was about families, can you extract the methods section of your dissertation for a book chapter in an edited volume on family research? You want to avoid plagiarism, including self-plagiarism, so be sure to be transparent and appropriately cite any work, including your own. Condense. When we look at the traditional thesis or dissertation, it's usually quite a lengthy document. There are also parts and segments that are required by the institution but may not be suitable to include in another piece of work. One aspect is to pull out the main ideas that are going to fit the particular requirements of a journal article or a book chapter that you want to publish, and then to be able to edit those down while still retaining the core meaning. This is a more challenging than it may appear, but this is an important strategy to think about. It's also important to recognize that a dissertation and a journal article serve different purposes and audiences. A dissertation is written for a specific academic committee with exhaustive details and comprehensive analysis. In contrast, a journal article needs to be concise, focused, and structured for a broader readership. While your dissertation includes an extensive literature review and methodology, a journal article should highlight only the most relevant background and essential methods. Rewriting your work with this shift in mind will improve its chances of acceptance. Everybody thinks highly about his or her own research, but when you submit to a journal, you need to convince the broader academic community that your research is important and worth publishing. This takes time. Expand. You may need to expand upon your work. Perhaps you have a gem in your academic work that you now want to build upon. Perhaps it's been sitting in your drawer for a while and you finally want to do something with it. This is often field dependent on how much time has passed that will enable you to publish, but it might be worth revisiting. You may need to expand it by adding some updated literature. Maybe there are new developments in your field that you want to take into account. Or maybe you even want to collect some additional data or do another set of interviews or something like that. Perhaps this is a place where you're collaborating with another researcher to, look at something from your work from a broader context. For instance, if your research was about college seniors and career aspirations, could you expand the next study to include college freshmen, sophomores, and juniors and look at their career aspirations at each stage of college? If you conduct research on kindergarten teachers, can you change the next follow-up study to first grade teachers? Those are some things to think about, and now I'll pass it off to Amy.
Thank you, Maya. So you might look at your work and think your thesis or dissertation is aimed at the audience of your dissertation chair or thesis evaluators, and that it's focused on the institutional requirements that you must serve to complete your degree. But there are probably other audiences too, like practitioners or professionals. Reflect on how you can perhaps adapt some of your work that you've done to meet a different purpose, to reach a different audience. Maybe you're expanding on implications of the study that are described in the final chapter, or adapting those to meet a need in the field. How can you use what you've done as a springboard? For example, if you research children's literature, can you publish your work in education or library science journals? So we talk a lot about the impact of our research. In many settings, this is something that is required for any kind of funding. We actually have a webinar coming up in August on how to write a research grant, and we focus a lot on impact there. In particular, you must reflect on what difference your work makes. Who cares? Who can actually use this? It may be other scholars, it may be clinicians. It may not just apply in the professional world, but it may be applying what you've learned in an academic sense as well. Your research could be converted into articles, or it could be evolved into a workbook or guide or practical tips. Think about how you can make the most impact. So we've mentioned different types of publications and outputs that could be generated from your thesis or dissertation. But as we wrap up, here are some key tips for successfully submitting your work as a journal manuscript. Converting a dissertation or thesis into a manuscript for journal publication comes with some common challenges, but these can be overcome with the right approach. One major challenge is condensing your dissertation. Journals can have strict word limits, so focus on the most important details. Another challenge is adapting your writing style. Dissertations tend to be formal and lengthy, while journal articles are more concise and direct. Make sure your writing is clear, concise, and free of unnecessary complexity. Follow the journal's submission guidelines carefully, as formatting errors may lead to rejection before peer review. Seek feedback from colleagues or mentors before submission, and don't be discouraged by rejection. Most successful publications go through revisions before acceptance. And lastly, stay engaged with your academic community. Attending conferences and networking with editors to evolve your publication and increase your chances of getting published. Not everything we talked about today will apply to you, but think about some of these options as you transform your work and focus on advancing your career.
Okay. Now I want to talk a little bit about choosing a journal. When thinking about a journal to submit to, it is crucial to do your homework. While you may want to publish in a journal like Nature or Science, you first need to think about the best home for your paper. You want to focus on many factors, not just one metric. As you are exploring journals, think about the journal's reputation. What do your peers say about the journal? What types of papers does the journal publish? What type of paper are you publishing? Is it empirical research, a review paper, brief report, or a book review? Does the journal publish these kinds of papers? Does your article reference publications that might be a good fit for your research? Look at the reference list and see if those publications might be a good home for your paper. Does your paper fit within the aims and scope of a journal you are eyeing? Who is the editor? Who sits on the editorial board? Are they highly cited in your field? How diverse is the editorial board? Do you know someone who's published in the journal? Does the journal state the current rejection rate or turnaround time? What is the peer review policy? Is it anonymous? Are peer review comments published openly? What is the readership of the journal? Is it a subscription-based or open access journal? Do you have funder requirements you need to meet where you are required to publish under a CC BY license or similar? Is the journal indexed? Where is it indexed? What is its impact factor? What do the journal's key metrics tell you? Could publishing in this journal have an impact on your research? Does your institution have any restrictions on where you can submit articles, i.e. require impact factor or a certain license? Does the journal you are looking at provide an open access option? Be on the lookout for predatory publishers, journals who don't do proper peer review. Transparency in the author guidelines is key. They are on the rise. Look for inclusion in indexes such as Scopus or PubMed and thorough publication policies. Here at Sage, we offer 2 different services for authors, Sage Path and our Journal Recommender. This will help you identify good journals to submit to, plus other publishers have similar tools. Now, I just want to be clear that selecting an academic journal can be very tricky. Often, scholars are told to publish within a particular set of journals within their respective fields. However, depending on the issues published within an academic year and the acceptance rates, young scholars can often wait from 1 to 3 years to get their work accepted and subsequently published. It is important to consider these concerns when selecting a journal. The most important aspects of seeking to publish your work within an academic journal includes the journal theme, the acceptance rate of the journal, peer review, and paper type. Does your work match or resonate with the selected theme of the journal or issue? What is the acceptance rate of the journal? Does the journal offer an actual peer review with guidelines, feedback, and advice? What type of submission are you thinking about for the journal? Okay. So next we want to talk a little bit about editor advice. So as a co-editor of a current journal, there are 3 things that I believe that you should do prior to submitting your manuscript to a journal. 1, you should read your paper out loud to a trusted colleague to get feedback. 2, you should allow another scholar to read your work and provide feedback for revisions. And 3, you should make sure the work you submit resonates with the aims and scope of the journal. You want to allow yourself time to submit your best work to the journal. All right, I'm going to turn things over to Derek now.
Perfect, thanks. So, I mean, I think when I think about publishing theses and dissertations, the first thing that comes to mind is the importance of it. When we think about research, research is communal. Research in our fields only advances if people share what they know. So if I conduct an experiment and I learn something about how the brain works, but I keep it to myself, I mean, yay for me, but it doesn't really help the field advance. It doesn't help people generate new hypotheses, maybe validate methods, and sort of move things along where, okay, we've sort of captured this little piece of the puzzle and we can maybe move on to the next one. So I think it's important to recognize the importance of sharing our research across a number of different ways, as was touched on here. You know, journal articles are fantastic for getting to other researchers, getting your work in the field, and there's something, you know, about it being preserved, right? Where the way that scientific work or work in scientific journals is indexed, it means that it's going to be available for, you know, years, decades, generations to come. But I think there's also real value to getting it out in other ways. You know, some of my best grant ideas have come from either attending a conference and learning about, you know, something that sparked an idea in me, or maybe reading a blog post or coming across a post on Twitter or X or other social media that sort of sparked something. So I think there's a lot of different ways to get it done. And I want to emphasize, we talk about, you know, think about your research in terms of a journal article or a blog post or maybe a book chapter. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You know, in many cases, you're going to publish journal, for example, in a journal article, but that doesn't mean that you can't try and get it out there in other ways through podcasts, through blog posts, that sort of thing. I guess the 2 other things I want to sort of touch on. One of them, we often think, you know, thesis and dissertation about graduate work. Depending on your field, sometimes your undergraduate work can actually be really helpful. It can be publishable as well. So I'm thinking of, in my department, we had a student present an autoethnography on her experience coming out as a middle-aged woman. So she wrote this really like extensive undergraduate thesis, exceptionally well done, that would form the perfect book chapter in a collection of similar stories. And indeed, that's what she and her undergraduate thesis supervisor are working on right now, collecting similar stories for a book of which her thesis is going to end up being the lead chapter. So again, it can be undergraduate theses as well. And just sort of to reiterate the idea of, you know, part of publishing, I mean, less so with blog posts and podcasts and infographics and that sort of thing, but more with, you know, journal articles and even books to a certain extent, or well, to a large extent. Papers are going to get rejected. Book chapters are going to get rejected, and that's okay. It doesn't mean they're a bad chapter or a bad article. It means it maybe isn't the right fit for that journal. So we talk about this in my lab all the time, where you know, I'd say probably more than half of our journal articles don't get accepted by the first journal we submit it to. So we talk about rehoming our articles, finding a new home for it. Sometimes it involves tweaking it a little bit, adjusting it to the aims of where we're planning on sending it. But, don't be discouraged if it doesn't get accepted the first time around. Even within a journal, it'll usually get rejected and revise and resubmit. But even if it's an out and out rejection, it doesn't mean it's a bad paper. Talk to those colleagues, talk to your supervisor, get feedback. There's always ways to strengthen it, perhaps, and find the right home for your work. And know that right home is out there. It's just a matter of sometimes a little extra work to find it. Those are my thoughts for now.
Thank you, Derek. Tiffany, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Yes, I actually had a couple of things. If we're just talking about just from the editor's desk, some of the articles that I often get as an editor, I often question some of the people, or I'll follow up in an email with some of the scholars who are submitting, and I'll ask them, what was your goal in writing this piece, especially if I noticed that it didn't really have a strong letter to the editor. And sometimes they'll say things like, well, I really want to just get my work in print. I really just want to publish something in my field. And so I'll kind of help redirect them, and we'll look at some other pieces that they may have. But there's a number of ways that you can publish a lot of the work that you're doing. I do have concerns about scholars that do 20 conference presentations and have one paper, on their CVs. That's really a no-no. So if you're doing that, start looking at those conference papers that already have a lit review, already have research recommendations, already have critical questions, and look at turning that into some type of paper. But I know we've talked about course papers and essays and things like that. But again, when you're looking at the goal for your work, depending on the field, it might be a journal article you're looking at. And I agree with Derek in terms of it might be a strong book chapter. If it's not a strong book chapter, you may want to even look at a vanity press, depending on the field that you're in: English, communications, especially political science, different areas like that. So I just want you all to consider that if you do get a rejection, as Derek talked about, that's part of academic life, but it's not the end of the road. You could take that piece and turn it into something amazing. So just please keep that in mind. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you all, to everyone who spoke. We're going to go into the Q&A in a moment, but before we do, I wanted to flag a few things from the Sage side. We see a number of questions about upcoming webinars in the chat. So our How to Do Research and Get Published webinar series will continue. It keeps going on. So we have one next week on business and management, one in 2 weeks for Pride Month on research that impacts the queer community. So this is for anyone who identifies as part of the community or anyone who wants to advance research in that field. We've also got one in early June on article and journal level metrics, and then one in August on how to write a research grant. So please do keep an eye on those. Wrapping up, to share that we have a number of resources for journal article authors on our gateway. This is a dedicated space for author support. There's more information on how to get published, and there's also Chinese translated versions as well. It's important in academia, especially as you're getting started, to build out your academic library. We will share the slides here if you're interested in these specific topics that could help you as you convert your thesis into something publishable. And my last note is that we have a new author newsletter coming from Sage, and this is particularly relevant to those of you on the call today. It will include free academic publishing resources and information about our upcoming webinars. So I'll leave this slide up for anybody who is interested. Please do sign up for it, and you'll continue to get the latest from us at Sage. I'm going to leave this up as we start with the Q&A. So please do continue to post any questions you have for our panelists directly in the Q&A. Derek, I have a question I'm going to ask you first, if I may. So somebody asked here, I've published 3 articles based on the findings of my dissertation. Is there any chance of publishing my dissertation as a book, given some chapters are already published as articles?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a short answer and a long answer. The long answer involves starting with your publishing rights, and to what extent you can sort of publish what you've already published in the journal. So that would be involve going to your author agreement, that sort of thing. That being said, most book chapters or a lot of books will the authors will make reference to their previous work. So it's unlikely you'd be able to take it word for word, right? But being able to take some of those ideas, expanding on them, turning them into something new, and referencing. The key is always going to be referencing those original pieces of work. Absolutely, you can do that. So it's sort of like a a review article or a meta-analysis, or the review part of a meta-analysis. So I think there are ways to do it. It won't be as simple as just simply taking your thesis as is and publishing it. Almost certainly, by virtue of publishing those papers, the author agreements would potentially preclude that, and that would be something you'd want to look into to make sure that you're not violating any copyright. But there are interesting ways to do it, and there are ways that you can sort of take those ideas, expand upon them, and maybe turn them into a book.
Great. Thank you very much for that.
So I'd like to piggyback off Derek's comments. So if you're a scholar that is in English, education, social science, political science, and psychology, typically a lot of the journals have a policy for what's called borrowed content. And so your publisher could make a deal with the journal to pay for that content. So then you would be able to publish the articles as is within your book chapters, or just expand on them. And you would just cite the articles, and that would mean that the journal would still get a cut of whatever your royalties are, but you would still be able to use that content. And that was something that I had to just kind of learn on my own after doing some research on journals and publishing and how everything works. But it is possible, especially within those fields. A lot of my colleagues who publish in English education, they often do this when they're writing monographs, because it's only a 5-chapter book, and 2 of them may have been previously published papers. So I just wanted to clarify that, but I agree 100% with everything that Derek said. Thank you.
Thank you both. Amy, Maya, anything to add, or are you happy with that response?
No,
Those are great responses.
yeah, great responses.
Thank you. Well covered. All right, perfect. I've got another question, and Tiffany, I'd like to pose to you first, if I may. Do podcasts, academic blogs, and social media publishing also add on to the academic CV and help secure an academic job? Or do they just help disseminate our research to non-academic audiences?
They do both. So let me just cover this, because a lot of institutions are changing really the way that they do business with the proliferation of social media. Depending on the type of institution that you're going into, if it's more of a research 1 institution or research 2 institution, and they're looking to expand their reputations, they tend to go out and recruit what's called public scholars. Now, that doesn't negate that you are supposed to do the necessary hard work to publish in academic journals, but they are looking for people who know how to do a lot of community engagement and engage with the public about their research. It's the academy is changing. It's not the same anymore. So we're looking at a situation where academics are required to be a lot more social now than in the past. There's a lot more front-facing responsibilities, and you'll find that you'll even see that in your tenure guidelines. The tenure guidelines are changing now. So you definitely should be listing the podcast that you do under public scholarship. All of my mentees who are in communication studies, the ones that are in literacy, the ones that are in political science, they typically now it typically lends itself to that. A lot of the webinars and different things that you're doing, it definitely should go in your CV so that people can see that you're not just going online and talking, you're actually interacting with scholars from the UK, from Africa, from South America. And that does give you a lot of academic credibility. And it definitely should go on your CV. Blogs should go on your CV. as well, whether it's a personal academic blog where you're disseminating your research, or if it's a peer-reviewed blog. Some of the national organizations now have peer-reviewed blogs. So it definitely should go on your CV. And I did see something in there about the question about social media publications. That's changing every day. And one of the things that I've noticed is I'm starting to see a lot more scholars who are creating their own curricula online and disseminating it to the public. And that's great scholarship. And so depending on what it is, typically I tell scholars to put that down as a digital teaching series so that people understand that it's not just random stuff you're putting online, that this is a cohesive body of scholarship that you have thought about and put together for public consumption. So just consider that as you're putting together your work. Let me know if you have more questions.
Thank you for that, Tiffany. That's very helpful. Oh, we've got
Sean,
another
can I
question.
add to that?
Please do. Yes.
Yeah, I 100% with everything Tiffany said there. I think, if you want to be even a little cynical about it, you can think as you're getting, as you're engaging with media and the general public, it's a little bit of soft marketing for your university, right? That your university's name is getting out there and being seen as the place where the experts work. So when students are making a decision, where do I want to go? Well, there's a little bit of that, but even beyond getting a job, I'm seeing that with grant capture as well. So I'm up in Canada, and I serve on one of the panels for it's the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. It's basically the Canadian version of NIH. And one of the things we're looking at in our grants is the knowledge translation and knowledge mobilization section. And it is, over the past 5 years, become increasingly important that not only are scholars committing to doing the work, but also getting it out there, not just to academic conferences and in papers, but talking to community groups, advocacy groups, knowing that government money that's going to create knowledge is going to go towards the public good. So I think there's a lot of value to that in a lot of different domains.
Great. Thank you for that, Derek. I appreciate you expanding. Got another question here. In your opinion, when do you think data used for a PhD thesis would be considered as dated for a journal article publication?
So I can start. So it really depends. Typically 5 years out, somebody would say, well, this data is 5 years old. You want to use the data within the certain time frame that you have. Now, they might not say that if no work has been done in that area. They might just say, hey, this work is still good for at least another year. Just update the references and you'll be able to publish from this particular work, particularly if you're talking about, some findings from your research and things like that. But one of the things I tell people is, while you're doing your dissertation, this is the time to start looking at ways that you can start publishing your research findings. Even if you're just doing small research reports and things like that that could be published somewhere, you want to take it and do something with your dissertation so that it's not just sitting there in a box after you finish it. Okay.
Agree entirely. It's really there's no set time limit. It depends on the field, right? In some cases, the gap in the literature is still there, at which point your data is still relevant. But if the field has moved on and you're trying to publish something that essentially has been resolved, whether that's 1 year later, whether that's 10 years later. The other thing I like to recommend is, and just building on what Tiffany said about, starting during your graduate studies, getting your work out there, whether it be, national or international conferences, sometimes even in-house conferences, presenting your data. I think it's a really great way to workshop your ideas, to talk about what your preliminary findings are, to talk to experts and sort of bounce ideas over around your interpretation of the data. And sometimes they'll agree, sometimes they'll disagree, but all that will help you shape your work, both for your dissertation and for the publications that are going to follow. You're essentially getting some pre-peer review that way.
That's very useful, Derek. Thank you. Amy, Maya, anything to add, or are you happy with that?
I just wanted to add that if some time has passed since your dissertation or thesis, yeah, make sure you also update your references. You've included the most relevant literature that's current, so that it puts it into context as for the current situation.
Thank you, Amy. So I have a different type of question here. I know the life of an academic, it takes a lot of work to get started in academia, and really thinking about publication early is very beneficial. So I'm curious, do you have any tips for how to prepare publishing your thesis early on when you're starting to think about your thesis defense?
Yes. So one of the things that I talk to a lot of my mentees about when they're in doctoral programs is that they should take the proposal that they put together for their dissertation and they should consider looking at some of the book proposal uh, templates that are on different, not Vanity Press, but the academic press websites, and look to see if their dissertation is a good fit for some of the academic presses. So at the same time that they're working on their proposal before they defend their dissertation proposal, they should also be writing a shell for a book contract if that's their goal. You shouldn't wait until it's completely done. I disagree with that. You want to get into the habit of always applying to have your scholarship somewhere, because once you finish, you have this huge dissertation and you could take a portion of that and create a book off of it, rather than waiting until you're completely done and then you apply. I just don't think that that's a smart idea. I think you should be working on it, because think about it. When you're in a doctoral program, that's the only time you have people who will read over your work willingly. They're being paid to do it. You know, there are colleagues at conferences who are going to be so excited that you are somebody who is a doctoral student and you're thinking this far into the future. And so, you know, that's the time when you're at a conference. Hey, could you read over this for me? Those are great conversation starters. And a lot of academics are like, sure, let's pull up, let's go have something to eat, let's read over your work. I don't mind. It's just, you know, usually the proposals are about 5 to 7 pages. It doesn't take long to read it over. And so that's the perfect time to really start to get that help. Don't be shy. Stop thinking everybody's going to steal your work. Let's, let's communicate with one another, really get the help that you need while you're in these doctoral programs, really maximize that. One of the things that I told one scholar who said, I just couldn't get anybody in my doc program to read my work because everybody was busy mentoring their students. And I didn't really get a lot of mentoring. My doctoral dissertation advisor was retiring. I said, go to the writing center. And she was like, I never thought of that. And I said, just make sure that you list whoever read over your work in the writing center, make sure that you acknowledge them in your publication. And that's how you do it. All right. Let us know if you have any other questions.
I think that's key, that speaks to an idea that, you know, it's sort of planning to publish right from the get-go. I sort of think of it as if you're building an office building, you got 2 employees, but you think you're going to have 20 in the future. You know, if you can build that building so that it's ready to adapt into 20, that's much easier than building it perfectly for 2 and then doing a retrofit after. So starting early is a great thing. You know, in my field, it's more the manuscript based like sort of manuscript style chapters of a thesis, right? Where you're sort of already creating manuscripts for like journal articles within your thesis. And I saw a question that came through just about how do you structure that. I mean, the way I've typically seen that structured is it starts with a general introduction that sort of covers the big question and sort of shows your knowledge in the area. And then then you basically insert in your 3 or 5 chapters, which are essentially standalone papers, and followed by a discussion at the end that kind of ties everything together. It's not going to work for every field. Certainly it's more common in sort of the neurosciences, maybe in the medical sciences, that sort of thing. But I think that no matter what field you're in, the takeaway that sort of Tiffany started with is start when you're planning your thesis, think about how you're going to turn it into published work right from the get-go, so you're constructing it in a way that's going to be easy to shift over. Because when you're done your dissertation, you're maybe starting a job, you don't have a ton of time to then go back in and pull it all apart and rebuild it, or as much time. If you can make that as easy as possible by planning early, you're doing yourself a huge favor.
Thank you both. Amy, Maya, anything else, or are we happy with that?
No, th those were excellent responses.
Agreed. Thank you. All right, I have another question here. What are the benefits of publishing research with an academic publisher versus somebody else, a popular or a trade publisher? Do you have any thoughts on that?
That
So
sounds
I'll
like a
chime
tricky
in.
question. Yeah, yeah.
I'll chime in on this just for a bit. So it depends on your field again. If you're in English, um, a popular trade publisher, really gets you a lot of accolades because your work wouldn't just be marketed inside the academy, it would be marketed outside the academy. So it really just depends on your field. But I will say this, and I've talked to several junior scholars about this who are saying, well, I don't know what publisher to go to. And I said, I want you to go make sure that you talk to your academic librarian at your institution, because what I'm hearing is that you didn't get some requisite knowledge that you need, because academic publishers are ranked. So you want to make sure that you pull that ranking and that you're identifying the publishers that you definitely want to submit your work to. You want to be very intentional about that. The turnaround time is not fast. Okay, whether it could be 6 months before you hear from somebody about whether they're going to publish your work. I have a proposal right now that I put in 2 years ago. I still haven't heard back from a very reputable academic publisher. And so it really depends on what your goals are for publication, but also being intentional and making sure that you're looking at the rankings, you're looking at the types of manuscripts they take, because those are huge factors in whether your work is even going to be accepted by an academic or trade publisher, because you really don't know. And also, some trade publishers are actually listed on your tenure and promotion documents, because some people have kind of, published in those, published with those companies, and they've kind of broken down those barriers, because academic life used to be very restricted. They would say, well, you can only publish here. So it really depends on what field you're coming from, the types of the reputation of the academic or the trade publisher. All of that matters. Okay. And so you want to consider that when you're looking to get your work out there.
Thank you, Tiffany. I've got another question here. Someone wrote that their thesis had a very small sample size. How does that impact their chances of publication? What is the best course of action? Do they need to acknowledge limitations, or do you have any additional tips?
I can start with this one. I mean, it depends. I mean, small sample size depends on the field. It depends on the type of research. It depends on, when I think about MRI work, something like 10 or 8 would be a small sample size, but it might be something you can, depending on work with, depending on how novel the findings are. Is it pilot preliminary data, or is it something that's, more or less we've resolved that question, at which point it's not really adding to the discussion. Whereas, something in the 10, 12, 15 range, if you're doing, sort of big, large scale quantitative work, is going to be far too small. Whereas if it's qualitative, depending on, what the question is, who your participants are, 10 may be huge. That might be a ginormous sample size. And so it's hard to say. I think, sort of look at what the standards are in the field. I think look at how novel your findings are, how novel your research question is. Certainly something that's really novel, smaller sample sizes are are much more palatable as a way for sort of future hypothesis generation, research question generation, versus something that 20 years ago was resolved. But I think in any case, yes, always acknowledge your acknowledge the limitation. Always acknowledge the limitations. You want to spell it out there that it's true just about any sample size. This isn't conclusive. A single article is typically not isn't the mic drop moment that, okay, this question is done. But yeah, that would be my thoughts on that. I wish there were like so many of these. You wish that there was like a hard and fast rule that like, here's your cutoff. Above this, you're great. Below this, it depends so much on a number of factors and a lot of the nuances.
So I wanted to piggyback off of what Derek is saying. Depending on the field, I know that autoethnography for a lot of the humanities and education is pretty popular right now. There's even research institutes for autoethnography, and it's literally a sample size of 1. So it really just does depend on, the type of research you did, whether it was qualitative or quantitative. But one of the things that I've always talked to junior scholars and graduate students about is not the problem, but how to fix it, right? So if you have a small sample size, when you get to your next academic stop, you need to put in an IRB for your same research study and collect some more data, okay? And so spend a year collecting more data on your topic while you're writing other papers. And then that'll fix it. And then you'll have even more updated data and you'll be able to continue your research and get it published. So just keep that in mind, that one IRB you did as a grad student turns into 15 IRBs as a junior scholar. That's just the way it is. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you for that. Very helpful. I'm seeing a really good question, maybe a little bit outside of some of the scope of what we're talking about today, but I think it's nice because Tiffany and Derek, you have great insights in the early career researcher life. So somebody wrote, basically, there's too much to read. It's really hard to keep up with the literature. It's challenging. Um, and as part of it, they're struggling to find a research gap to fill. What should they write about? What should they do their research in? Do you have any tips, any guidance on how to keep up with the literature, how to, remain afloat and how to find a good gap to fill?
Yes. So there's a couple of things that scholars in my field do. One of them is we keep what's called a research file. And it is essentially a spreadsheet of different research studies on different topics. And it's easier to use Excel to do it because you can flip through the different sheets based on whatever you're studying. And that's a good way to keep up with it. When you become a professor, you get a grad student, you have them pull those research articles for you every week, have them summarize them for you, and then you put it in the spreadsheet. And everything they summarize, you put their name next to it so that they can get credit and publish alongside you when you finally publish your work. It is a lot. Stop trying to do everything. You don't have to read every single thing. Look at what you're interested in and make sure that you keep up with the research in that area. I'm somebody who does a lot of research on inequity and research, gap research and things like that. You don't have to do gap research if you don't want to. If that's not what you're interested in, you don't have to do that. You can build on any research that's in the field. Research is endless. Every time you read a research study, at the very end, there's an implication section at the end of the article with questions, future directions of research, future research questions. Though you can take any one of those questions, cite that person, and then do a research study based on it. Research is endless, okay? Every time you do research, you end up with more questions. So don't get overwhelmed. Just take a deep breath and sit down and start organizing yourself. And I want to give you a little assignment. I want you to go to your professors and I want you to ask them to show you how they organize their research. They don't have to send it to you. They don't have to release it to you, but ask them to show you how they organize their research. I think you'll be surprised. There are some people who literally take pictures of the topics and put it on the spreadsheet. They don't even write it. They just take pictures of a receipt from a restaurant where they were writing about their study and put it on the spreadsheet. or they may have a folder, or they may have a recipe box from the old school from the 80s where the research is sitting on note cards. So ask your professors how they organize their research, so it'll give you ideas on the best way for you to do it. Because I'm kind of an old school person. I'm not an electronic organizer. My stuff is sitting up in a pile on my desk with with different with the old pegboard with all my ideas on it. That's the way I organize it. And it's important for you to know that, because you need to know that there's no one way to do it. All right.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, there's a reason there's a filing cabinet in the background here, is that I'm still old school with paper and writing notes in the margins, and I've got within there are little folders with a little tab that are, each little research topic, and that keep perpetually adding to. And concurrently using like a reference manager software with tags to, for a little bit easier searching. But again, that's what works for me. That's how my brain works. There are others, I've got students in my lab who are entirely digital with the way they organize it. And so it's sort of finding what works for you. Only other thing I'll sort of suggest, it's an imperfect way. But I always make a point throughout the year of reading a certain number of systematic reviews and meta-analyses. It could be scoping reviews too, depending on your field. But that's where people are summarizing what's been done. Now, oftentimes they are about a year or so out of date, because by the time they've done the search and written the article and it's made its way through the publication cycle, there's usually a little bit of a gap. But it's a good way of sort of summarizing where in the relatively recent past where the research was, especially if it's in your area or an area you're interested in. So, I think that's always an interesting way, apart from reading the primary articles. And you always want to go back and read the primary articles. It's a good way. I love meta-analyses and systematic reviews, because there might be something I missed that's, I'm not going to read every paper they cite, but as I'm going through, go, oh, that one is particularly relevant for this research idea I have, and go back and sort of pick those ones that are going to be most relevant. But that's another sort of way to get not only someone else has done the review, and again, systematic scope. You want something where someone. I'm always leery about narrative reviews. To a certain, they're good. They're great for getting people's ideas on the topic, but if you're using it to sort of a broad landscape of what's happening on there, narrative people can miss things. So it's good from that, but it's also great to see what scholars in your field are thinking is important, how they're interpreting the confluence of findings. And you may agree, you may disagree, but at least then it's like almost having a conversation with someone about the state of the field, and sort of seeing what they think.
Thank you, Derek. And with that, I think it's time for us to wrap up today's webinar. I want to give a huge thank you to our guest panelists, to Derek and Tiffany, to my SAGE colleagues, Amy and Maya, and very much thank you to Taylor for joining us as our ASL interpreter. And thank you to everybody who's joined us today. We hope to see you in a future webinar. And do note that I will follow up with all of you with recordings, the slides, and a certificate of participation for those who have joined us live. So we hope to see you in a future webinar. But in the meantime, good luck researching and take care.
Thanks all.